Oh, good afternoon. It is a breakout session, even though we are in the main auditorium. So if people would like to move forwards, there are lots of spaces at the front here. So do feel free, just you get a better view of the wonderful panel. So there's lots of opportunity there. So thank you very much for coming. My name is Elizabeth Jones, and I head the transport research for the UK government's Foreign, Commonwealth and Development Office. It's my great pleasure to moderate this exciting session today on the future of transport. I think we're really in for a treat. We've got opening remarks from Astra Bonini from the UN Department of Economic and Social Affairs, or UNDESA. And as many of you will know, then UNDESA are leading on the UN Decade on Sustainable Transport. We then will follow that with a fantastic panel, as you can see along here, and then closing remarks from Francisco Dionori from the UN Economic Commission for Europe. So without further ado, I'd like to invite Astra Bonini, who is Chief of Integrated Policy Analysis at UNDESA, for the opening remarks on the UN Decade. Thank you, Astra.
Thank you so much, Liz. Ladies and gentlemen, it's really a privilege to be here for the Transforming Transportation 2025 conference with experts from all across the transport sector and outside of the transport sector as well. On behalf of the United Nations Department of Economic and Social Affairs, I would like to extend gratitude to the World Bank and World Resources Institute for organizing this particular session, which focuses on the future and gives us an opportunity to share ideas about the decade ahead. I sit in the Division for Sustainable Development Goals at the United Nations, and we're working hard to implement the SDGs, the Sustainable Development Goals, by 2030. And I have to say the role of transport has only grown in significance in recent years related to the SDGs. From supply chain disruptions and climate impacts to geopolitical challenges, the importance of resilient and sustainable transport is more apparent than ever to both supporting progress and maintaining gains that have been secured. Transport remains both an enabler of our development goals, but also a sector with significant challenges. Global greenhouse gas emissions from transport make up nearly a quarter of total emissions, and energy use in transport continues to be dominated by fossil fuels. With emissions projected to grow, it's clear we need a transformation and a shift towards sustainable, low-emission transport systems that can support both our climate goals and the achievement of the SDGs. Over the next decade, it will be crucial to scale up existing solutions and transport finance, applying evidence and technology to enable this shift. In urban planning, for instance, we must aim for smarter cities with increased access to public transit, rail, and non-motorized options like walking and cycling. Similarly, we need to advance the electrification of transport, adapt zero carbon fuels, and enhance smart infrastructure. All of these elements must converge within our transport policies and within nationally determined contributions to build more inclusive and sustainable societies. The importance of sustainable transport is recognized globally, as reflected in a General Assembly resolution adopted in late 2023, which called for the first UN Decade of Sustainable Transport to start in 2026. At UNDESA, we are fully committed to supporting the implementation of this resolution, raising awareness, bridging transport, climate, and SDG silos, and leveraging the extensive evidence and research that already exists to change course in transport. In collaboration with UN regional commissions, UN system entities, and a range of stakeholders, we are working on an implementation plan for the Decade of Sustainable Transport. We are eager to ensure that the implementation plan brings together the views and voices and actions of all relevant transport actors and builds from dialogues like this one. We also want to ensure that the UN Decade of Sustainable Transport addresses transport in a balanced manner. For example, all sectors, maritime, inland transport, and aviation, should be included in the plan, with passenger as well as freight transport being addressed. In addition, we are considering transport in the wider SDG implementation framework and in relation to the Paris Agreement. Interlinkages between policy aims will be central to the success of the decade, ensuring that actions tackle issues such as climate, road safety, air pollution, health, access, and affordability simultaneously. In the spirit of leaving no one behind, the implementation plan will also pay special attention to ensuring that our transport systems are inclusive and safe for all users. Just as one example, we will pay special attention to gender equality and the empowerment of women and girls, not only as transport users, but also by ensuring that women feel the transport sector is a viable career choice for them. Ladies and gentlemen, the world expects us all to lead with solutions that are inclusive, climate resilient, and aligned with sustainable transport. Aligned with sustainable development through sustainable transport. As we look to the upcoming UN decade of sustainable transport, let us ensure that our collective actions drive the systemic changes that are needed to reduce transport emissions, strengthen global connectivity, and support the Sustainable Development Goals. I very much look forward to hearing your thoughts on all of these in the discussions ahead. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Astra. It's a perfect framing for the panel discussion, so thank you. It's also just to note that Astra is here tomorrow as well, and has kindly agreed to present at the Sustainable Mobility for All, Some for All consortium meeting in the morning. So if there are specific questions, then there's that other opportunity for discussion. That's from 9 till 12 noon in room C2 350. So over to our panel, I think. We know that we've heard from Astra on the outline of the decade. There are many consultation plans, and we've heard a little bit more about the preliminary aims of the decade. As we know, it's the first UN decade on sustainable transport, and clearly this is a really great opportunity. However, it does commence at a time of reduced ODA or aid globally, and clearly this will be quite challenging. What this means, though, is that it's even more crucial to work in partnership, building on each other's successes, learning about what does work and what doesn't work, and making sure that as a transport community, that every dollar that is spent on transport is spent as effectively as possible. So thinking about those investment decisions based on evidence and data for the greatest impact on prosperity, on a livable planet, but also on poverty reduction. So here we have a superb panel, and I'm sure that they're going to inspire us as to how we can achieve some of these aims. So I'll just ask the panel to briefly introduce themselves. So perhaps I'll start at the end with Francesca.
Hello, good morning or good afternoon, everybody. Francesco Dionardi from the United Nations Economic Commission for Europe. I look forward to hearing what comes up next and then hopefully draw some conclusions at the end. Thank you, Liz.
Hello, Giselle Saraleghi from IFC. I'm the global climate head for what is our transaction advisory, which is really working with governments on public-private partnerships and also corporate finance, privatization, M&A, and other work. Thank you.
Hi, good afternoon. My name is Fuat Sawash. I co-head the infrastructure finance and advisory team at JP Morgan. We finance infrastructure projects.
Hello, good afternoon, everyone. I'm Marusha Kardama. I'm the Secretary General of SLOCAT, which is an international partnership on sustainable low-carbon transport.
Good afternoon. I'm Daniel Bongard, team leader for of the global transport team at GIZ, based in Bonn.
Hello, everyone. My name is Henrik Gudmundsson. I work in the climate policy think tank Concito, based in Copenhagen, Denmark, and I'm in the mobility program. Thank you.
Thanks very much and welcome. So, Marusha, I think we'll start with you, but thinking about the perspective and expertise at that kind of global level, then SLOCAT's work at the global level on both climate and the wider development agenda. Can you give us some key areas that you feel it's crucial to focus on as we want to establish this upcoming decade of sustainable transport?
Thanks very much, Liz. And I'm going to try to build upon what Astra presented to us, and perhaps what we have to do first is decide what impact we want this decade to have. What do we want to see the decade having helped us achieve in 10 years' time? And my suggestion could be that we look at 5 impacts in particular. The first one could be provide innovation and a call to action that sets a really clear pathway for transport systems and services that work for people, that work for the economy, in a livable planet, as you were saying, Liz. The second impact is very much about accelerating national and subnational policies and strengthening the capacities for that, particularly in low and middle income countries. A third impact that we would like the decade to have is about leveraging public and private investment for sustainable transport. Again, here I would like to particularly emphasize the needs of low and middle income countries. A fourth impact, you also mentioned it, Liz, is that one of generating open data that helps us tap into knowledge gaps, that really supports evidence-based policy making and investment, and that allows us as well to monitor progress over the 10 years. And a fifth impact that I would see is the one of supporting coordination within the transport sector, but also our sector with other sectors, and also within the United Nations, while enhancing the opportunities for international cooperation. So if we look at these 5 impacts, then of course the next question could be, okay, on what are we going to focus? Because our sector is, of course, vast. The needs are multiple across different geographies. What can we do? My suggestion could be, my proposal could be that what we need to do is to precisely anchor everything we say about transport in the wide transformation of our economies and our societies. And that could take us to look into priority topics like, for instance, transport as a driver of resilient economic growth, or the right to mobility, meaning the right to social inclusion and the right to participate in socioeconomic opportunities. It could also take us, therefore, to focus a decade on transport as a creator of jobs, of livelihoods, as a connector of commercial activity. It could, of course, also take us to look into transport and energy transformations. They go hand in hand, so we can phase out fossil fuels. And lastly, we would need to look into transport economics and into finance, the right type of transformations we need to do there. So that's a bit some discussions that we have been having within our partners, within this SLOCAT partnership, and also with others, trying to support the efforts that the United Nations under the leadership of TESA and the regional commissions are being carried out right now. Thanks, Liz.
Thanks so much. That's really fantastic. So Daniel, just coming to you now then, we've heard very eloquently from both Astra and Marusha on the potential of this upcoming decade. It'd be really helpful to hear from GIZ on the livable planet side of this work and the climate action, and how you feel that transport is actually shaping up in the NDCs that we've heard about, and more generally in the Paris agreements.
Yeah, thanks for that question, and thanks also for the introduction on the decade. I think I'm really convinced that the decade is a huge opportunity. Yeah, so I think it really enables us to unite and work for a time frame where really transformation can happen. I have been working quite a lot on climate change side, and I think this year in 2025 holds also quite a lot of opportunities for to kickstart the decade and to really give it a drive and to make it work. And I think the climate process, because it's well established and going forward, and we saw with the global stocktake also the calls for action that are really needed, and the transition away from fossil fuels, that really matters for our sector, and it can, I think, be taken up. I'm convinced that sustainable transport is a means to also achieve the climate targets, and so in that regard, there is such a big synergy. This one graph shows just transport The red ones are the top one emitting, the number of top one emitting countries, and the blue ones of the second emitting. So you see, transport is getting more and more the most important sector for actually achieving the climate targets. And in a couple of years, it will even be 80% or 90% until we are there. So I think the climate process gives a lot of opportunities. The first one is that countries are still writing their climate plans, their NDCs. And currently, with our joint tracker of SLOCAT and GIZ, we are tracking the submissions of the countries, and out of the 195 countries, 20 have submitted yet, but still 180 can do that, and that's, I think, crucial. And out of those 20, 17 have transport mitigation actions included in their plans, and 7 even have had a target. And we need to make sure now that there's more of this, and more countries do that. So I think that's a priority of this year. And if we manage, that's a great opportunity. The second opportunity is that with Juan Carlos Munoz, who was here yesterday on the panel, and I think this morning in a session, so we really have a champion who is currently holding the ITF presidency. And so I think this can really give us a drive and can also enable us and engage us. And we are working very closely with him, and he's extremely committed to work on this. And the last opportunity, and then I come to the end, is that the COP30 in Brazil is also in Latin America. I think Latin America as a continent can be quite crucial to also put the transport topic on the agenda. I think in Latin America, transport is really one of the key issues. And so the COP28, we had a call for transition away from fossil fuels. We had the call for tackling the road transport emissions, and we have to operationalize this now. And I think it's an opportunity at COP30 to actually do that and get there. And also the IEA, by the way, said we need a sectoral transport target.
Great. It's all sounding, so it's just all lining up just perfectly, which is fantastic. So you mentioned the SLOCAT, the joint SLOCAT work, but maybe we can go back to you, Marisha, to hear a little bit more about that, but also some of the in-depth work that you've done with countries to actually think about how we really do try to get much more ambitious targets within the NDCs on transport.
Thanks a lot. I mean, it's work that we can do because, again, we are a partnership. So I'm going to have now a few moments to share with you what we released just a couple of days ago. It's a 5-point plan for transport in the NDCs. And we have done it based on the work that others are doing, on the work of WRI, on the work of the International Transport Forum, and also on the sectoral and model guidelines for transport in the NDCs that organizations like UATP on public transport, UIC on railways, the PATH initiative on active mobility, or our colleagues for GNPT on popular transport have been putting together over the past months. And that allowed us to come up with a 5-point plan to get that robust dimension of transport in the NDCs. The first one being set targets. Second, scale up action. Third, catalyze finance. Fourth, secure your assets. And fifth, prioritize people. So if I can unpack this a tiny bit, conscious of time, of course, setting targets is about making sure that we're going to have very robust targets for reducing transport emissions in the 2035 deadline, which is what the next round of NDCs is, but in the horizon of a net zero pathway for 2050. The good news is that in the last round of NDCs, 20% of countries did that. And in the new NDCs that are being submitted, we are seeing already countries like Andorra, Botswana, Marshall Islands, St. Lucia, Switzerland, and the UAE doing so. And the Swiss NDC is perhaps an interesting example here because they are setting a target of 41% emissions reduction by 2035 and then 57% reduction in the horizon of 2040. If I go to the second point, the one about scaling up action, it's very much about scaling up action for energy efficient and fossil-free transport. This is about regulatory frameworks and incentives. It's obviously as well about investment in public and collective transport, in railways, in safe walking and cycling, in zero and low emission vehicles and the infrastructure that they require. In the last round of NDCs, we did see, for instance, Sri Lanka having a very clear a set of measures across the avoid, shift, and improve. And in the new NDCs, we are seeing Singapore doing so. But it's equally important that we have NDCs that will help us secure transport assets, make them resilient, adapt them to climate change. We have seen in the last round of NDCs, Colombia doing so, and Lesotho is an example in the new NDCs that are coming in with risk management and also with the ambition of climate-proofing the roads. If it is about catalyzing finance, we all know in this room what it means, but then we know how difficult it is, of course. It's about that, again, investment across the avoid, shift, and improve. In the last round of NDCs, China had measures about that. And in the current round, we are seeing St. Lucia, for instance, having very interesting measures on that. And last but not least at all is about prioritizing people. It's about making sure that it's a comprehensive approach to climate and transport hand in hand, and also making people part or center to the transition. We have seen in the last round of NDC, South Africa having very clear measures on that. And in the new NDCs that are coming in, the UK NDC, for instance, has got actions about dedicated programs for going into education and skilling and a just transition jointly with workers, with unions, with businesses, and with different types of employers. So this is a bit an idea of how can it be done, how countries can do it, and how they have already done it in the past, and how they are starting to do it. What we now need is a robust number of NDCs taken as there, and not just a few doing it. Thank you.
Great, thanks very much. And you've both sort of spoken about the importance of data and of being able to actually track some of those that progress. And so, Henrik, we'll come to you now, just to ask you to talk a little bit more about the ODA report that you've recently released. I know there's been quite a lot of interest in this report, and you know I'm a big fan. But yeah, so we'll look forward to hearing a bit about the key findings and the way forward.
Thank you so much, Liz. It's very nice to have a fan. I'm very happy about that. So with support from the UK government, Concito prepared a study on ODA for transport, official development assistance, which is part of the finance that we are talking about. Of course, it's only a part, it's a public part, but it's an important one because for many countries, ODA is a significant contribution to their investments. Overall, ODA is $275 billion per year on average, if you look at all sectors, and a part of that is for transport. And the ODA is governed by the OECD, the Development Assistance Committee. They have a quite rigid and I would say impressive regime around the reporting of these numbers. So it's called the creditor reporting system. All donors would report how much they provide in ODA to that system. That would be donor countries and would be multilateral organizations like the World Bank and others. And when they do that, they attach a number of categories and codes to the ODA. And one of those categories is called purpose codes, which signifies, for example, which sector receives the funding. And this is where our study comes in. We look at the ODA for transport, and we can see that it's around $12 billion on average over the last 10 years, which is around 6% of all ODA, which is about the same as the energy sector receives. But sort of the critical thing in terms of sustainable transport is that is very crude. The purpose codes for transport are that there are 7 codes, basically, and they reflect the classical transport modes. So you can see if the ODA goes to road transport or rail transport or maritime transport, air transport, then there is a code also for policy and some other minor codes. So this provides a very, I would say, crude image of the support that is going in that direction. And our study aimed to look at ways we could potentially enhance or improve this kind of reporting to better reflect concerns for sustainable development and climate change. And maybe I will come back to that in the second question, what our specific proposals were. But that was sort of there is definitely a case for reform, we would say, because these codes, they haven't been reformed for several decades. When we look at the system of national accounts from 1968, it's almost the same. It's a copy of that. If you compare with the energy sector, the ODA has been reformed quite significantly several times. They have 27 codes, many of them referring directly to the SDG on sustainable energy. You can report on specific types of renewable energy and so on. It's much more nuanced. So we think there is some inspiration to get from the energy sector in changing and reforming the reporting going on for ODA for transport. Yeah, thank you.
Thanks so much, Henrik. And actually, just even in all the discussions that have been ongoing from yesterday and today, and all the major changes and transformations that we're talking about in the transport sector, I mean, it really makes it quite stark that those codes haven't been updated for about 3 decades. So, just continuing on the theme of data and thinking about tracking, then Daniel. Throughout the conference, we've really heard about the importance of data and the importance of evidence, innovations, and how we actually can make sure that they are evidence-based decisions. Can you tell us a bit more about your work on data, on the state of transport data as a sector, and any platforms that you're engaged with?
Yeah, thanks for that question. I think in our work, our purpose is to really support our partners to sustainable development, to invest in transport, to create policies. And all of this will be based on analytics and data, where we very often issue studies, ask together with our partners to say, okay, we need to understand the current situation, we need to understand different scenarios. And then we do this, so we subcontract the study, and then later it's published in the PDF, and the consultant who's doing the study is cleaning the data, is then putting the data into models, is identifying data gaps, and then it's in a PDF and it's published. And maybe a year later, World Bank is working in that country on a different project, and then they commission a study, and again, they start collecting the data, they hire a consultant, cleaning the data, and then publishing a PDF. So I'm convinced in this age, and also to change our approach to support, is that we need the data sharing, and we need also to share the clean data and the data that already has been worked on, so that when we work, we build upon each other and not restart the work and waste maybe 30% of the consultant's resource on, again, doing the data cleaning. So, and this is why we engage in a joint community approach on managing data. And we would really love to see all of you and the community to also engage in this, because we think data really needs cooperation. So it does not make sense to have competition on data platforms or anything like this. So we have been very happy to see that there is a strong interest. And so those organizations working on this, specifically, I would also like to mention UNECE, Francesco, who were very eager and supportive in that, and also committed to say, yes, we want to host such a platform and we want to support this process. So that so they come together and developed an approach how this could work, and with the grateful support of HVT, the FCDO program. So there's now already a data platform up and running. It's still in beta phase and testing, but it can be looked at, it can be worked on, and so there's actually a place for that. We upload our Excel sheets and our data, and we put the right metadata on it so it's easy to find and get there, and even the smallest data sets, and everybody from the community actually can use it. And then secondly, I think it's so important to have that community approach on this, so that so many engage, and it's not one platform that is maybe belonging to GIZ, and then so we operated for a couple of years and then it's gone again. So we want to have something that is sustainable and long-term. And I would love to see it connected to other global initiatives, to the Decade, to Some for All, to something. So if that would be doable to somehow connect, that would be great.
Great, thanks very much. So I think there's an opportunity for you all to come and speak to Daniel immediately afterwards and see if there are opportunities for getting involved in that data platform. So we've heard quite a lot about some of this data, and Henrique, you were going to speak a little bit more about the financing side, so to tracking the data on ODA. So if you can just talk a little bit more about that, and then we'll move over to our other colleagues on the panel to talk about finance more directly.
Yeah, sure. Again, the ODA is, of course, just one part of all the finance, but we think maybe it's an important one also because it can contribute to set standards, and it would be nice to have more also common finance categories, I think. But what we propose based on the report is definitely that there should be publicized data on ODA. And we see it as a crucial part of the decade for sustainable transport to actually follow how much finance is provided for the transport. Is it going down? Is it going to shrink like maybe ODA in general? And who will suffer from that and so on. So at least some kind of reporting. And we have like two options. One is the easy but not very excellent option is simply just to report what is already there as an indicator. Follow that over time, ODA across the different modes and so on. And maybe attach some of the other codes that are already in the system, codes for example, the Rio markers, which indicate contributions from projects to climate change. And the SDG focus codes that are also in the system, but unfortunately not applied uniformly across all countries. So it is not very good indicators of the contribution to sustainable transport. So much more interesting, we think it would be to revise the structure of purpose code for transport and use that as an element in reporting on progress during the decade, meaning to add simply more granular codes to the system, reflecting the different sustainable transport concerns. It could be codes on the road transport, for example, for active transport, for public transport, for electrification, for climate adaptation of road infrastructure, and also for the other modes. Similar, more granular codes could be added without getting rid of the existing system, because then we would lose continuity, but simply being able to report more detailed about what is being funded through the ODA and where are the missing options. That would be super interesting in our point of view. And this is something that would be probably the responsibility of the OECD, that committee, but it will require that members, that we say countries, would support that and discuss a reform in the context of that reporting. That's our recommendation. But of course, it's only from a private think tank. It will require careful reflection. You shouldn't disturb something that already works. You should be careful about changing things in terms of, for example, transparency. And there are many other concerns with this reporting, but we think it could work. And we think, again, that it would be super interesting if we could also see some kind of alignment with other finance frameworks for the private finance sector, for example, the taxonomies that are out there, taxonomies on sustainable finance, both in Europe and in Asia and many other places. There are several finance taxonomies out there, and all of those have something on transport, and all of those, also the private frameworks, are more, obviously modernized, are more reflective of climate and sustainability issues than the current transport ODA reporting. So I think there's a lot to learn across these frameworks and potentially align some of them. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Henrique. So as Henrique said, then ODA is just one part of finance. And as we've heard this week in pretty much every panel and every plenary, then the issue of financing has really been at the front of the discussions. So Giselle, given that we are moving to a more ODA scarce environment, unfortunately, it would be really useful to hear your views on the kind of wider variety of sources of finance and how we actually go about mobilizing that capital finance.
A critical aspect, finance, because when we think about the action that we need to accelerate to avoid the tipping points, Astra, you pointed out the critical decade ahead, and the UN stocktake told us by 2030, not even a decade, we need to reduce emissions by 43%. And if we look at the data that shows that last year there was 320 billion in losses due to climate change, that's alarming. We need to accelerate. So finance becomes a critical aspect. And it's institutions like the World Bank Group that are very well placed to deliver both with government clients and also to help deliver on private capital mobilization, which will be so critical to get to the trillions needed annually in investments by 2030 and 2050. An important thing that came out of Baku, our last COP, was a commitment by our World Bank group, Ajay Banga, and the other MDBs, projecting that our own climate finance would reach roughly 120 by 2030, and in addition, hoping to mobilize an additional 65 billion and well beyond, I think, on that. So critical factors, I think, that really point to accelerating action. But I wanted to share some other numbers on what we've already been doing in terms of creating that livable planet that we spoke about earlier, and certainly drilling down the NDCs into a pipeline of investments is going to be critical. It's going to be critical to bring in partners like JP Morgan, Fuat, and we'll come to that in a moment, I think. But IFC has been very actively working to look at transition to low carbon and resilient and inclusive economic growth. And a key part of that is infrastructure, and even more key part of that is transportation, because it's contributing to roughly 25% of global emissions. I think we're well positioned to develop that climate smart pipeline. We're doing it in the work that we're currently doing with our governments in structuring public-private partnerships, which are absolutely vital. And I think it's interesting to note IFC has already mobilized 70 billion since 2018 in climate finance, a critical aspect. But it's a drop in the bucket when we talk about the trillions. So the partnership and what we can do to build those partnerships with private capital mobilization is absolutely key. And what we can do to create demonstration effects that can be replicated, help cut and create precedents in the market. And I'll come back shortly to kind of talk through some of the project level work that we've done. But I think it's really critical to kind of begin to put those numbers out there. And partnership is going to be absolutely key. I'll stop there for now and happy to come back.
Thanks very much, Giselle. So just thinking about partnerships, then Fuat, as the co-head of the infrastructure finance at JP Morgan, I'm sure that you have seen many challenges in promoting sustainable finance, and particularly in emerging markets. But can you actually elaborate a bit more on those investment challenges, and actually how you see that we can really start to achieve some of these numbers that we need, which are so impressive?
Liz, thank you. The single greatest challenge that we face in emerging markets, not only sustainable infrastructure, but infrastructure finance more broadly, is the great abundance of capital that is available for emerging markets infrastructure. You might find it surprising everybody's talking about how do we find the trillions, et cetera. If you've been told that there's a shortage of money, you have been lied to. And I'll support this with a little bit of evidence. Today, it is cheaper to finance a road project, a port project, a renewable energy project in South Africa, in Brazil, in India, in the Philippines, than it is in the United States. So there are a lot of people asking, well, why don't we get the Western capital and the sort of the US and the Canadian pension funds to invest in emerging markets? The better question is, why don't the emerging markets banks invest in the US when this is, they could get better returns investing in developed markets? Now, the flip side of this is a fantastic opportunity for emerging markets. If you can finance projects, if your cost of capital, which is such a big input, is lower than you can get in the US, which is the biggest capital importer of the world, this is a fantastic opportunity. So I think the real question to ask is, how do we get more projects? How do we, instead of worrying about money, and as a bank, I can tell you there's nothing to worry about, how do we unlock the floodgates for projects so that you can take advantage of this plentiful, affordable capital?
Okay. That's really good to know that there's no problem with the money. So, I think that's actually one of the most positive.
No problem with the money.
Great. So actually just building on that then, Giselle, can Can you actually tell us a bit more about some of these projects that you've been involved with, and that actually it feels as if maybe the money's there, but is the problem the projects?
Not the problem, but the opportunity, actually. And it's the opportunity to translate the NDCs into a pipeline of investable projects, and to bring the private sector in, investors, financial institutions, to help mobilize the trillions that we need. We have to integrate climate change considerations when we are looking at structuring public-private partnerships. It's the heart of bankability. It's the heart of sustainability. The last thing we want to do is to structure an asset that in year 2 of operations is suddenly hit by the next floods, the next wildfires. Again, that 320 billion of losses is an underestimation of what we're seeing. So integrating climate resilience and adaptation is absolutely vital. So we upstream are working with governments to build in those solutions to look at how do we do shifts across infrastructure, but in transportation, also look at urban solutions where we can look at, and I'll come to that in just a second, look at urban solutions, modal shifts. And then also when we think about the backbone of the economy, airports and ports are vital. So how do we integrate into that infrastructure, the resilience and decarbonization? The innovation's already there. We now need to look at integrating it, make it bankable, affordable, and be able to move forward, and looking at those cost-benefit analysis. That's really critical. Downstream, I can tell you, we're also investing in financing there. In fact, we've also created what's called a TRIPS platform, colleagues here that can even address some of those critical, where they're working with investors to incorporate sustainability, then to look through to finance and create opportunities to really kind of customize solutions across the board. And that's that private sector element. So let me share, I guess, some examples of projects that we've done. On the upstream, when we talk about the PPPs, I spoke to you about urban mobility, and I've got 2 examples that are really key. And when we think about the emissions and how critical it is to kind of shift our urban solutions. So in Senegal, we worked with the bus rapid transit system to finance the operations and to acquire EV vehicles, helping transition. We're creating jobs, we're creating connections. It is a whole of the economy shift going forward, and really improving lives, reducing emissions. And there, with critical investors like Meridiam coming in, we helped unlock opportunities. It's creating that climate smart transaction. In Sao Paulo, another urban solution, we worked with the government there to secure over 2 billion in private sector finance. Some of that also went on to do a green bond, first in Brazil, in Sao Paulo, and creating opportunities to reduce emissions. These are some of the examples upstream. I'm going to offer just maybe one more downstream, if I may. In Mexico, you heard one of our colleagues yesterday in one of the panels, Element, which is a fleet management company. We helped to finance their transition to EV vehicles. Again, unlocking opportunities to transition to resilient and decarbonizing, so reducing emissions. These are just a few examples of what we've been able to do, and these help set important precedents in the market to crowd in private sector capital.
Great, thanks so much. So it's really interesting, isn't it, that actually we've heard overall through the panels in yesterday and even earlier today, this restriction on the financing, but actually we're hearing quite a different message from the both of you, the opportunities that are there and that unlocking of finance. But can you just sort of try and give a bit more detail around, the roles of the different organizations, but also overall, it is felt as if there is not enough finance, and actually that's almost the opposite of what
I'll address what I think is a fallacy with an example from the United States. There's not a single mile of high-speed intercity rail in this country. right? So if Henrik had the right code for, how much money went into high-speed rail in the US, he'll just see zero after zero after zero. And then somebody might come in and say, you know what, high-speed rail is super expensive. So somebody looking at this picture could say, oh, wow, there's a money problem. The US has run out of money to build high-speed rail because you see the zero, the dollars aren't coming in, and this is something that's super expensive. What's wrong with that argument? Well, it's not a money problem. It's a project development problem. It's a political willpower problem. It is a intergovernmental agency cooperation problem. It's a land rights problem. It's a right-of-way problem with Amtrak and the freight trains, etc. It is 100% not a money problem, even though you keep seeing the zeros next to the amounts invested. And so that's the analogy also in emerging markets. It's not for a lack of money that Third Avenue in New York looks like it was shelled last night, right? It's not because the US is a poor country. It's because somebody hasn't done the project development. And this is why the real bottleneck, and as JP Morgan, we've been very vocal about this, is in scaling up facilities like the Global Infrastructure Facility. So this is housed in the World Bank Project Development Platform. It should be scaled up 10x, if not 20x, right? That's how you start solving the problems. 2030 goals, we talk about them. I can tell you with a very high degree of confidence in the transportation sector, they will not be met. Why? Because if they were to be met, we'd see those projects getting done today. We're not seeing those done today. So if we're talking about the decade of transportation, what we need to do is invest in project preparation now so that maybe by the end of that decade, those projects start being built. Fast project development has been tried and tested. People talk about Belt and Road and how it can be very efficient, move quickly. In many places, fast project development or rushing project development is not a good idea. In transportation, which is probably the most complex or one of the most complex of the decarbonization sectors, right? You need a transit-oriented development. You need alternative fuels. There's a whole host of adjacent industries that need to come together. You really can't rush project development. So my suggestion is focus on the upstream, focus on project development. Stop talking about how do we find the trillions. Give me the projects, we'll find the trillions.
Great. I think you've just said it. So, I mean, that's really ambitious. And I think it's a good challenge to us all. So I think that's actually a really positive place to sort of end on the panel discussion. We do have a few moments for questions, probably just 2 questions, but please do go ahead.
Hi, I'm Georgia. I'm an energy sector professional, and I love what I heard. That is not about the money. And I'd love to get your perspective, especially from JP Morgan, on risk. My view, borrowing from my experience in the energy sector, looking at project development, is it's not about mitigating risk. That is important. It's about how you price risk adequately. I'd like to understand from you, when you assess projects, what is the source of data that you use in order to price risk adequately and then inform the risk mitigation tools such as, guarantees, other credit enhancements? Thank you.
Thanks very much.
It's a fantastic question. I'll tell you that the biggest cost for a bank is the capital that you need to set aside for each loan. And the amount of that capital, we don't determine, our regulator determines. So, and the amount of capital that we set aside for project finance, which is 20, 30 years of data showing it's super safe and you get paid back and so on and so forth, we believe is generally disregarded by the regulator. And, the amount of capital that we put aside is the same as unsecured corporate loans. When we assess risk, we don't do it on a backward-looking basis other than resources, wind and solar. You look at the resource curves, but it's really forward-looking, especially if it's anything climate-related. A 100-year flood is now happening twice a decade. It's really what can go wrong? So it's not a statistical, but absolute basis. It could be floods, it could be fires, it could be lack of traffic. And are we mitigated in that, things go really bad scenario? And sometimes the answer is no. What can go wrong is this place could get invaded, and you can't buy risk in many instances for war. And we just have to live with that. And the number of risks that are uninsurable that we just have to live with is in fact increasing with climate change.
Thank you. Giselle, did you want to add anything?
Look, I think partnership again, and I'll come back to this time and time again. We are integrating various mechanisms. MIGA is here to help create guarantees that help minimize risk. We've got platforms like MCPP that have first loss. In fact, we're creating a new equity fund that's also going to be looking at investment in emerging markets to also take some of the first loss. So we're well placed to partner to help create some of these de-risking mechanisms. We can't change Basel III, but these are the broader regulatory market issues. But we certainly can help to create firsts and de-risk within the context of the work that we are doing.
Thank you. Should we take the other question?
Thank you. I'm Jason Meggs for The World. So I'm a climate policy and transport policy expert, and I'm very concerned about the need to adopt lighter electric vehicles instead of heavier vehicles. I have brought this idea to the World Bank in the past, and one of the comments I received from a high-level person is impossible to scale, impossible to finance. I do believe, and correct me if you have an alternative idea, that in many use cases, lighter electric vehicles are the shortest path to equitable, affordable mobility and to decarbonizing transport spaces. I could go into detail. My concern is, as far as I know, no country, no city has adopted an aggressive, ambitious paradigm shift philosophy to maximize that potential. As we look at the NDCs, as they're slowly emerging, is there a potential to see those adopt them? What would be the pathway? How can we get this on the map? How can we make it possible to scale, possible to finance?
Thanks very much.
Thank you.
So Daniel or Marusha, might you like to respond just with a few points?
Yeah. So I think that's a key question. How do we get to the electrification? So we have now, I think, the major automobile markets committed to phase out of fossil fuel-driven vehicles. And so I'm convinced these signals needs to be given to the OEMs, the car manufacturers, to basically on the supply side, provide those products that actually match the market. And I think we have heard tomorrow in the morning in the panel wonderful business models like Bazigo in Kenya, how to actually get those things in the market and how to make it work on the ground. And so in that regard, electrification of the light-duty vehicles is key, and it will have to be done by the end of the decade in 2035, when 100% of the sales needs to be electric. And I think we need to have the same with the heavy-duty vehicles by 2040, 2045 at that time. And so we need very strong signals, regulatory signals, that this is going to happen, because we need the investments. And without the certainty that the regulatory framework support these investments will not be taken. And I'm from Germany, so in Germany it's really a critical question for the automobile industry to really take those investments, and they are hesitating.
Excuse me, can I just, I need to clarify my question. I'm sorry, I was too nervous. I started incorrectly. Many people don't know what a light electric vehicle is. I'm not talking about light duty cars. I take it as self-evident that we cannot drive our way out of climate change. Billions of people will never afford a car. It is too slow. I'm talking about lighter vehicles, including cargo bikes, electrifying two-wheelers, motorcycles, tuk-tuks, etc., which, by the way, fill a need that public transport can never fill. They are useful at rural and urban areas. So this is not on the map. It needs to be accelerated as a major topic. How can we do it?
Thanks so much. So I think what we're going to have to do is just take that offline now, because we're actually running out of time. But thank you for the question, and it is something that I think has been discussed in the main in some of the.
It's not in the NDCs. No country, no city has adopted an aggressive, ambitious paradigm shift, but this can be done. It's the shortest path. Why isn't it on the map?
Thank you for your question. It's a good advocacy. So with that, we are actually going to move on to our closing remarks, which we have the honor of Francesco, who is the Chief of Transport Networks and Logistics Section of the UN Economic Commission for Europe. So it's just to say a few reflections on what you've heard here, and anything that you'd like to answer on questions that have come through. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Liz. Wow, where do I start from? I think we've had a lot of very interesting discussions. First of all, thank you, of course, to the World Bank for inviting me and inviting us here today. I think we've had an excellent discussion. We, as EC, are very proud to be supporting DESA as a partner in the preparation of the implementation plan for the decade. As, of course, a regional commission, we are custodian to 61 legal agreements in transport. And of course, as a result, the decade, the success of the decade is very important to us. Obviously, our work through the ITC strategy, the work on decarbonization supports this. And for us, I think we look forward to ensuring that all the key aspects of sustainable transport, which we've discussed here today, are the most effective for our, hopefully not expensive, effective for our member states in terms of efficiency, in terms of accessibility, security, safety, of course, reducing environmental impact, and resilience. And coupled with this, of course, supporting member states in terms of capacity building and education. I think what we've heard here today is that the implementation plan and the decade as itself is a first step in what we need to do. And there are some really key takeaways from what people have said today. And I would like to start, well, from what Astra said in terms of the importance of dialogue and how fundamental that is. And I think we've had a lot of that here today, really helping to develop sustainable transport. Liz, you mentioned in your introduction, I was very happy then to hear it, also others speaking about it, the key role of partnerships and how they are fundamental. They're fundamental in policy, they're fundamental in finance, they're really fundamental in making sure that we work together to reach this outcome. I like very much Marusha's 5 impacts as a strong, really place to start from the work on the decade. Also, the 5 points on the NDCs. I think 2025, the magic number is number 5, I think. And that can really help us going forward. Daniel, your emphasis also on the climate process as a basis for this is very important for the decade going forward. And of course, what you and what Henrik have mentioned on data is what we really need as a basis to be able to allow policymakers, all stakeholders, but also policymakers in particular, to make good laws and good work going forward. And of course, thank you for plugging the work of EC on that, of course. I couldn't not mention that. The ODA work that you've done, Henrik, is also fundamental in that process. Finding those codes is really something we need to work on to support these data activities. On the finance side, I think, Giselle, you're absolutely right. Finance is critical to this. And without the necessary money, then we're not going to go anywhere. And I think the examples that you gave really help us in being able to put forward some good practices, some best practices to facilitate going forward. I think, Fuad, after your intervention, there'll be a long queue of people here asking for money. I have to say, I'm on stage, so I get first call. And the United Nations really needs your support in terms of assisting our member states in funding projects and really developing sustainable transport. But what I also liked about your intervention is what you raised in terms of the importance of project development and ensuring that there is a long-term view on this. And this actually takes me back to what the Minister from Malta mentioned, I think yesterday, in his intervention and the collaboration, or was it Monday? I apologize. But in the collaboration that they've had also with their opposition in terms of having long-term planning of transport, to think beyond the election cycle, which is often the key limiting factor that we have with transport. Transport is long-term, political cycles are short-term. And if we want to make an effective decade going forward, we really need to start thinking, yes, for the decade, but also the investments that go beyond the decade. I think the decade itself, and I will finish very shortly, the decade itself puts transport on the map. This is very important. Although it's true, I haven't seen a map without transport on it for a long time, but I think it's still relevant that it does put us on the map. There is still a lot of work that needs to be done. And we're here because there's a lot of work that needs to be done. Otherwise, we'd all be out of a job, I guess. And we, of course, as EC, very much look forward to contributing to this. And to finish off, this really needs to be supported by all stakeholders. We at the UN try to make sure everyone is involved in this process, and we really hope that these stakeholders, with public and with private finance as well, it can really help us going forward. One final thing, if I may, Liz, and I apologize because I'm talking too long, but I'm Italian and that's what I always do. On that last point on light electric mobility, we do already have a framework within the UN for this. It's called the Transport, Health and Environment Pan-European Programme, where we have focused extensive analysis and developed a process. There is a master plan for cycling, there's a master plan for walking, and this is very much about active mobility and electrified active mobility as well. So there is already a framework which is not perfect, but we can build on that going forward. So thank you very much, Liz, for allowing me to say a few words.
Thanks, Jessica. So thanks very much. Because I think that's been a really fascinating panel discussion and really gives us a lot of food for thought. I think it's really useful to be thinking about the timeframes, actually, as you say, but on transport, whether that's about the investments or what we can actually achieve during those timeframes. So please do join me in thanking our panel and our speakers. Thank you.